January 15, 1966. It was on a Saturday. There were sounds of gunshots in the early hours of the day. A young group of military officers have decided to take matters into their own hands. They claim to be frustrated by the growing corruption in the country, the massive rigging of the 1964 general election, and the political chaos that was sweeping the country, especially the one in Ibadan, Western Nigeria, where Obafemi Awolowo and Samuel Akintola, two close comrades, had turned into political enemies, which has led to bloodshed. The coup was supposed to be a revolution to change the political structure in Nigeria, but instead of healing Nigeria's wounds, they opened fresh ones. And then, some days later, the names of the coup plotters began to emerge. They were mostly Igbo soldiers, with Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeogwu and Major Ifeajuna, the prominent ones among them. But why was it only one part of the country that got tired of the corruption in the country? Are they truly the only ones that love Nigeria? And if it was not an Igbo coup, what should we call it? The answers to these questions will shape your understanding of the coup. In this documentary, we explore the facts, the figures, the faces behind the mask, and the outcome of this 1966 military coup. We are telling the story of a mistake that changed everything, not assigning blame or defending any agenda, and how for many years it has become an ethnic plan, an Igbo coup filled with betrayal, designed to divide the country. It all began with some decisions that were not normal. Stay with us while we take you to the very beginning, where it all started.
Major Nzeogwu, can you please give me an account of the night of the coup in Kaduna?
Well, it's rather something like the longest day.
Before the 1966 coup, in October 1960, Nigeria got her independence from Britain, and for the first time, Nigerians had control over their own affairs. The country was a beautiful piece of artwork designed with cultures, languages, religions, with over 250 ethnic groups spread across this vast landscape. But behind the celebrations of national pride, something dangerous was brewing. The ruling party at independence was the Northern People's Congress, NPC, led by Sir Ahmadu Bello, the Sardauna of Sokoto.
There is no need for me to do any election campaign here. In the old days, the Emir of Kano was known as the chief warrior of the Sultan of Sokoto. And today, I regard all people of Kano as the warriors of the Sardauna of Sokoto.
His deputy, Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, served as Nigeria's prime minister. In the East, the National Council of Nigerian Citizens, NCNC, was led by Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, who later became Nigeria's first ceremonial president. In the West, the Action Group, AG, led by Chief Obafemi Awolowo, was the third major force. But this regional party arrangement in Nigeria was marked with deep ethnic division, power struggles, and political tension. Nnamdi Azikiwe would later join in alliance with Tafawa Balewa to form a national government, while Awolowo became an opposition to their government. During this time, Nigeria's political structure was a fragile union of three major regions, but by 1963, a new region would be created, the Mid-Western region. It was carved out from the Western region, from the Benin and Delta provinces of the region, and its capital was Benin City. The Northern region was dominated by the Hausa Fulani, with its capital in Kaduna, the Western region by the Yoruba, and Ibadan was the capital of the region, while the Eastern region was dominated by the Igbo, with Enugu as the capital city. Each region had its own premier, who was responsible for the affairs of the region.
This is Chief Obafemi Awolowo, who is the leader of the Western region of Nigeria, which has just celebrated its self-government. Now, Chief Awolowo's title here is Premier, to distinguish him from the federal prime minister.
In the process of making this video, I read some books so that I can have an understanding of the issues and how it all played out. I also found out an online bookstore that sell important books of history. They are called Roving Heights. They make it easy to get books by just typing in the name of the book you want or the name of an important individual you want to read about. They will then provide you the book you want and other book options that are similar to what you are looking for. They also offer book delivery, which make it easier and more comfortable for anyone. So, to get more on this 1966 coup and other important history, check out this bookstore. I'll add a link to the description, which will give you some discounts. Moving on, by 1962, a national census was organized to determine the population of the country and to know how many representatives each region will provide at the national parliament depending on their population size. This was the beginning of public disagreement in Nigeria outside the various party issues. Some regions claimed that their population was poorly recorded, so that they would be given an unfair lesser amount of representatives at the parliament, and this led to some sort of crisis. As tension was building up, one region against the other, the government decided to reconduct the census in 1963. The new census result showed that the North had the largest population, and by extension, they would be given the most seats in the parliament. This automatically gives Northern Nigeria and the NPC a natural advantage that many Southern politicians feared that it would result to permanent Northern dominance.
We are all witnesses to the dire and tragic consequences of the fraudulent acts of 1965, including the long, painful, and distressing abeyance of democracy and the rule of law.
This sense of division and the fear of domination turned politics in Nigeria into a dirty game. Corruption became rampant. Elections were rigged. Political thuggery was normalized. Public funds were looted without consequence. The national interest that united Nigerians during the independence struggle began to fade away due to selfish ambition and regionalism.
Well, the Igbos are more or less the type of people whose desire is mainly to dominate everybody. If you put them in a labor camp as a laborer, within a year they will try to emerge as headman of that camp.
Outside the issue of regional divisions and the absence of unity, there was also internal regional crisis. The Western region in particular, as of 1962, turned into a political battleground, Awolowo versus Akintola. This crisis was perhaps the biggest red flag before the coup happened. It was so heated up that by 1963, Chief Obafemi Awolowo was sent to prison as a result of this crisis. He was charged for treason and was accused of trying to overthrow the federal government. It happened that Awolowo wanted to become the president of Nigeria. He then resigned from his position as the premier of Western region and handed over to his deputy, Chief Samuel Akintola. After the struggle to be the president failed, he became the opposition leader and was making sure that the federal government did the right things by criticizing their wrongdoings. Remember that when he became this opposition leader, he was no more the premier of the Western region, but he still had influence over the region, and his influence was growing wider. Then the federal government, which was controlled by the Northern People's Congress, NPC, approached his former deputy, Chief Akintola, who was the new premier then, and convinced him to align with the federal government. As the premier, Akintola joining an alliance with the federal government means that the Western region, which is Awolowo's stronghold, is now in alliance with the government Awolowo was opposing. Awolowo was against this idea of joining forces with the federal government, and his supporters were against it too. But Akintola went ahead and aligned with the federal government. This caused division in the Western region parliament, and Awolowo supporters impeached Akintola. As a divided house, violence broke out between supporters of both sides, not just in the parliament, but on the streets too. Properties were burnt, bodies were littered on the streets, and there was what they called Operation Wetie, which was the setting ablaze of opponents by pouring petrol on them and lighting it up. The number of casualties was massive, and the police were helpless. But instead of a lasting peace to be negotiated, the federal government declared a state of emergency in the region, brought Akintola back as the premier, and sent Awolowo to prison on the accusation that he is causing trouble and wants to overthrow the federal government. People in this region began to lose faith in democracy.
I start to think of this word democracy. Democracy. Crazy demo. Demonstration of grace.
At the national level, there was a 1964 federal election which was conducted from December 1964 to early 1965. There were widespread allegations of rigging. Many candidates were declared winners before votes were counted. All these were mounting pressure and causing damage to Nigeria's democracy. In this chaos and political instability, young army officers, many of who were trained in Britain, watched the politicians as they loot the treasury and tear the country apart. To them, this was meant to be a democracy. But when was it beginning to resemble a military gun battle? By January 1966, the question was no longer if a coup would happen, it was when and who would give the command. Unfortunately, on that Saturday, January 15, 1966, at midnight, a group of young army officers were preparing to turn the country upside down. Among these officers was a young Major Chukwuma Kaduna Nzeogwu, a 29-year-old officer from Opanam in present-day Delta State. Although he is not originally from any of the Igbo states, but many ethnically refer to him as Igbo, basically due to his name Chukwuma and Nzeogwu. He was also called Kaduna, the city where he was born and raised, and he spoke fluent Hausa. His other co-conspirators were Major Emmanuel Ifeajuna, Timothy Onwatuegwu, Adewale Ademoyega, Don Okafor, and Chris Anuforo, among others. They planned the coup to be swift, to take out the political elite and set up a new system rooted in discipline and patriotism, according to their claim. In Lagos, the seat of the federal government, Major Emmanuel Ifeajuna, who was famous as Nigeria's first Olympic gold medalist in high jump, led the operations. His unit was assigned to attack this house near the Lagos Lagoon and take the Prime Minister, Tafawa Balewa. This was his official residence. They succeeded in getting access into the building and took the Prime Minister away. They also went to this nearby house, which was the residence of the Finance Minister, Festus Okotie-Eboh, and also took him away. According to this report by Max Siolon, Major Adewale Ademoyega was to make a public announcement on radio after they had achieved their plan in taking over Lagos. But that announcement was never made because they couldn't take over Lagos. In Ibadan, Samuel Ladoke Akintola, the premier of the Western region, was their next target. By this time, Awolowo was still in a prison in Calabar. So as the soldiers went for Akintola, he had already gotten the information that night that they were coming to take him. He got himself ready and waited for their arrival. It happened that the officers had first of all gone to the house of the then Deputy Premier of the Western region, Chief Fani Kayode, the father of Femi Fani Kayode, and arrested him. As they were taking him away, his wife sent a call across to Chief Akintola telling him what had happened. Then Akintola waited for the soldiers' arrival. Many reports suggest that he engaged in a fire battle with the soldiers and injured about 2 soldiers. Unfortunately, he also lost his life. But despite different accounts on what happened and how it happened, the result was that Akintola lost his life, and Chief Fani Kayode, his deputy, was later released by the soldiers. In Kaduna, Sir Ahmadu Bello, the Sardaunar of Sokoto, who is also the premier of the Northern region, was their target, and the leader of the officers who were assigned to arrest him was Kaduna Nzeogwu. Then, he was the chief instructor of the Nigerian Military Training College, 1st Brigade Headquarters, Kaduna. They also went after the governor of Northern region, Sir Kashim Ibrahim, and arrested him. Back then, there were governors and there were premiers. There were also deputy premiers. That was how the government was structured then, just like at the federal level, where Tafawa Balewa was prime minister and there was still a president who was Nnamdi Azikiwe. So after the day of the coup, a curious question began to arise. While key politicians were missing or killed, some persons began to imagine, who are those behind this coup? Although some Nigerians were in support of the coup, some were against the way it was handled.
I'm not a member of the army, mind you, but some progressive elements believe that this is not the age for corruption. People who go into public life must be prepared to serve for the glory of service.
What difference will it make if Balewa is found alive?
I would very much wish that he's found alive, very much so. But there is no doubt that his weakness in controlling his ministers is partially responsible for the present situation. Take the Western region situation, for example. His government refused to act, even though people are being killed daily and life and property are becoming unsafe. He refused to act.
So you wouldn't expect people to want him to get his old job back?
I wouldn't want him to get it back.
That was Mr. Gabriel Adebayo Fabule, a journalist in Lagos, when he was interviewed in 1966, some days after the coup. However, when all this were happening, Nnamdi Azikiwe, the president of Nigeria then, was out of the country on a health trip. He left Nigeria in October 1965, 3 months before the coup happened. His absence from the country and the fact that Dr. Michael Okpara, Premier of the Eastern Region, was not killed during the coup were part of the issues that many rely on to suggest that it was a planned Igbo coup. Why didn't they kill the Igbo politicians? They asked. Remember, there is no justification why any life should be taken away. In fact, the major mistake of that coup was the killings. So, if we are to pose the question, why didn't they kill the Igbo politicians? We should also look at why did they even kill anybody? One of the coup plotters, Adewale Ademoyega, wrote a book in 1981 that was 15 years after the coup. He titled the book, Why We Struck. He tried with the book to outline the reasons and the motivation in which they acted. Meanwhile, you can also get a copy of this book from Roving Heights through the link in the description. The book talked so much about the coup. According to him in the book, he said, there was no decision at our meeting to single out any ethnic group for elimination. Our intentions were honorable, our views were national, and our goals were idealistic. Even those earmarked for arrest, 4 were Northerners, 2 were Westerners, and 2 were Easterners. He made use of the word arrest, but that does not justify their actions. In Enugu, the capital of the Eastern region, they were also able to arrest the premier, just like they did in other regions. They took him away, but they later released him after the coup failed, which was when they also released Chief Fani Kayode, the deputy premier of the Western region, and Sakashim Ibrahim, the governor of Northern region. So, during the coup, there were military actions in these regions and in Lagos, but there was no attack in this region. The reason given was that during that time in Nigeria, there were no military barracks in any part of this region, and so the coup plotters couldn't find a way to mobilize soldiers who would conduct the coup in that region. As at then, remember that this region was the newest region in Nigeria. It was just created 3 years before the coup happened, and that was why Dennis Osadebe, the then premier of this Midwestern region, was neither arrested nor detained. But despite these details, the coup has taken a new interpretation. What was claimed to be a revolution against corruption was now being interpreted as an ethnic massacre. The news headlines didn't need to say it loud. Soldiers already murmured it in the barracks. The Igbo people have killed our leaders. It didn't matter that the coup was initially supported by soldiers of different ethnic backgrounds, or that the suspected mastermind of the coup, Kaduna Nzeogwu, was not an Igbo. At the launch of his book, former military president Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida would himself admit that the popular narrative of an Igbo coup was a myth. He stated that the January 1966 coup was not ethnically motivated, but a poorly executed act by young, misguided officers. This narrative from a key figure in Nigeria's military history, although it is his opinion, but having served in the army for about 29 years, he obviously knows something we barely know about. Back to our story. So, when the smoke of the 1966 coup began to clear, Nigeria was already standing in the middle of confusion. The civilian government had been deposed. The country was without a leader. Then, Major General J.T.U. Aguiyi-Ironsi took over. Aguiyi-Ironsi was a tall figure with a strong sense of military discipline. He was trained by the British, commanded a UN peacekeeping mission in the Congo, and was by 1966 the highest ranking officer in the Nigerian army. Although he was Igbo, he had allies across the region and was considered a professional soldier, not a politician. Yet, the moment he assumed power on January 17, 1966, the political mood in Nigeria shifted. For the coup plotters, Ironsi was not their intended leader. Their original plan did not envision him stepping in. In fact, some of them viewed him as part of the system they were trying to overthrow. But when the coup collapsed, Ironsi seized the opportunity and declared himself head of state.
My main concern is to restore law and order as soon as possible.
Initially, his ascension to power brought a sense of relief to many Nigerians. He was seen as a stabilizer, a soldier who could restore order. He condemned the coup, promised to punish those who took part in the coup. But all of that was not enough, because soon after, suspicion began to grow. As the country was still mourning her leaders, Ironsi, in a bid to bring back unity, although the unity was hanging before the coup, he came up with an idea he thought would be good. It was called Decree Number 34, which ended up to be his most controversial moves. This decree abolished the regional structure of Nigeria and replaced it with a unitary system of government. To Ironsi, it made sense. Nigeria needed unity, not division. But to the North, which cherished the way they lived in a semi-autonomous system with a northern Muslim as the premier, they were not interested to be found under a different system outside the one they operate. To them, this idea to unite the country under a single leader is an Igbo attempt to dominate the country. Suddenly, Ironsi was no longer seen as a neutral peacemaker. The perception, rightly or wrongly, was that he was consolidating power for his own ethnic group. After the Decree Number 34 was passed in May 1966, it unified the country under a federal system where there would be no more premiers in each region. There would only be a head of state in Lagos, which was the capital of Nigeria then. But by the next month, June 1966, tension had turned to rage. Riots broke out in the north. Igbo civilians were attacked, their businesses looted, and many killed. Estimates of those killed in these May-June pogroms range from hundreds to thousands, with many more displaced, deepening the tension in the country. The army began to break apart along ethnic lines. The idea that the coup was an Igbo coup was no longer just whispered. It was shouted in anger, painted on walls, and echoed in political meetings. Aguiyi-Ironsi may have had good intentions, but he underestimated the ethnic fault lines that the coup had exposed. His failure to clearly distance himself from the plotters, his controversial decrees, and the perception of ethnic favoritism would eventually cost him his life. By July 29, 1966, in the early hours of the morning, a second coup unfolded. It was swift, brutal, and merciless. Who was the main target? General Aguiyi-Ironsi. He had traveled to Ibadan to address a gathering of Western traditional rulers hoping to build national unity, but he never left that city alive. Alongside his host, Lieutenant Colonel Adekunle Fajuyi, the military governor of the Western region, Ironsi was abducted by soldiers who were acting on a revenge mission. Lieutenant Colonel Fajuyi, a Yoruba officer, was not the person the soldiers came looking for, but he chose to defend Ironsi, standing by him as a brother in arms. To him, he would not allow the soldiers take his visitor away. It was an act of loyalty. Unfortunately, the soldiers decided to execute both of them. That was just the beginning. The bloodshed didn't end there. Across Nigeria, especially in the north, Igbo soldiers were hunted down in their barracks. Some were shot in cold blood, others were lured into meetings and ambushed. Civilians weren't spared either. In cities like Kano and Kaduna, violent mobs turned on Easterners, killing, looting, and burning. The scale of these killings was horrific. Estimates suggest tens of thousands of Easterners, primarily Igbo, were killed in the north between July and October 1966, leading to a massive exodus of Easterners from the north. Things were going from bad to worse. The little trust between ethnic groups was shattered. It didn't matter that not all Igbos supported the January coup. It didn't matter that many had no knowledge of the plot. To those who organized the second coup, the killing of the northern politicians, the rise of Ironsi, all of it was enough to state that the Igbos wanted to take over. They judged by what they saw and what they suspected. It was James Deacon who said, "What you see depends not only on what you look at, but also on where you look from." At the end of the day, the January 1966 coup was many things: a rebellion against corruption, a failure in execution, a mistake aimed at correcting mistakes. It was also a turning point in Nigeria's history. But more than anything else, it has become a symbol of ethnic division. Was it truly an Igbo coup, or did it become known as one because of who lived and who died? Or, calling it an Igbo coup, is it simply a convenient narrative to justify revenge and deepen divisions? One thing is clear: the coup and its consequences threw Nigeria into a cycle of distrust and war, a cycle that still rings in our politics and identity. This video aimed at understanding the coup. Understanding the coup isn't about revisiting old wounds. It's about knowing where the scars came from. Only then can a nation begin to heal. One thing about history is that it doesn't whisper, it roars, and sometimes it roars in silence. Thank you for being there. See you in the next one. Don't forget to subscribe.